But first, while all eyes lately have been on the government after a particularly torrid couple of months, some criticism no doubt deserved, but some of it the work of well-organised activists during all of this, while attacking the Prime Minister personally, the Labor Party has been trying to reposition itself as a non-threatening alternative government. Wholly gone now, as Labor's National Conference this week has shown, are the big new taxes on things like retirees' franking credits, which gave Scott Morrison such an effective political weapon at the last election. Also gone is the demand to cut emissions much further and much faster than the government. The uncosted policy, you'll remember, that caused the Labor leader so much reputational grief and which works so strongly against Labor on the ground with blue-collar workers, particularly in Queensland's coal belt and the New South Wales Hunter region. Now, instead of higher taxes on things Labor doesn't like, such as coal, the opposition's now promising lower taxes on things they do like electric cars. Also muted, at least for now, is the anxiety over Anthony Albanese's leadership, his inability so far to cut through. Having the former Labor leader, Bill Shorten, introduced his successor to the podium as Australia's next Prime Minister, he said, well, it'd have been too corny a few weeks ago to even think that they would do that, but not so now, not this week. And the fact that the conference organisers carried it off, that's a sign to me of how focused Labor is on winning the election rather than squabbling in opposition.
Scott Morrison is the wrong man with the wrong attitude and the wrong approach for this moment in our national story.
We've learned the lessons of the pandemic. We're ready to lead for the recovery. And the next piece of the puzzle is the National Reconstruction Fund, a down payment on the industries and the jobs of tomorrow.
Now, I know supporters of the coalition won't want to hear this, but having done the job of helping get an opposition leader elected PM, Labor's doing all the things needed here to make them competitive and looking like a leader, and the tone of what you say, well, for some voters, that's almost as critical as what the policies might be. I wish it wasn't that case, but I'm telling you, that's the reality of politics in Australia today. And Labor's strategists got it right. Both the opposition leader there, you saw him, and his predecessor, Bill Shorten, looking and sounding statesmanlike rather than scrappy. Instead of the own goal on tax hikes from last election, this time Labor say they want to focus on the sort of country Australia should be, one, they say, that makes things. Makes things not by cutting red tape to make it easier to start a business and employ people, or ending the craziness of this renewable power obsession that's so damaged our manufacturing competitiveness, but via a $15 billion government fund to invest in new technologies, they say, and favoured startups. The sort of things that you'd expect banks to lend for or equity funds to invest in if they really did stack up. Instead, it's the poor old mug taxpayer that'll bear the risk here if Labor is elected. Now, this idea of governments picking the winners, banks that are too blind to see, well, that's always a bit of a plausible policy pushed around, isn't it? Now, if I had $1 every time a public servant in Canberra tried to convince me in the merits of this idea, well, I would be a rich woman. But here and around the world, this policy mirage, and that's exactly what it is, has always ended in taxpayer tears, because it's hard enough for savvy investors to spot trends, let alone bureaucrats who have never themselves been in business. Another message highlighted in Labor's national platform this week was to stress its credentials with women. And that was a new paid parental leave scheme, giving women their full salary for 6 months, rather than the taxpayer-funded 18 weeks at the minimum wage. Now, it wasn't lost on me here that this was more or less the scheme that Labor had opportunistically voted down when Tony Abbott was around. Now, if Labor really believed what they said this week, this scheme could have been in place over a decade ago. But again, what Albanese put up, it's another mirage, because it came without costings. Now, I know from Abbott's scheme, this new PPL will cost billions. Back then, it was to be paid for by big business, not the taxpayer. But with Labor, we still don't even know who's paying those billions. And that says it all. This is an opposition that will run a very disciplined, small target strategy. So many of these details we'll never know. We'll never know them, particularly because many in the media continue their personality attacks on the government, and there's no pressure on the opposition. And what that means, not that Labor won't have crazy and expensive policies if elected, it's just that you won't know about them this side of the election. It's the Daniel Andrews model, and it's exactly what Albanese is using as his playbook. About the only contentious measure in this week's stage-managed and choreographed virtual national conference was the call for the immediate recognition of Palestine. But even then, it was pitched as no big deal. Now, it's a massive shift away for Labor from where Bob Hawke was one of Israel's strongest defenders on the national stage. Here's Labor power broker Stephen Conroy's condemnation of this move earlier today.
This decision to insert it into the platform because Bob Carr threw a tantrum and then boasted about it afterwards is just embarrassing. The rest of the world have moved on. A whole range of Gulf states have signed agreements recognising Israel, something the Palestinians have never been willing to do. The Middle East countries are sick of the Palestinians. The only person who's still carrying this war on inside the Labor Party is Bob Carr.
Now, as bad as that was, what was worse was the way debate was shut down and long-standing respected Labor Jewish leaders like Michael Danby denied his right to speak on an issue critical not just here in Australia, but around the world, in particular, the very troubled Middle East.
I'm suppressed and censored. This part of the conference was a sham, an absolute sham. And I'm Penny Wong, I say this to you over TV because I couldn't speak to you at the conference. I would like an apology. I was discriminated against. You and your socialist left mates go on and on and on about how you're against discrimination. I was discriminated against. I was denied my legitimate right to speak under the standing orders of your conference against this thing. And a vast number of people in the Australian community are offended by the fact that no one was able to put that point of view to the Labor National Conference.
Now, what this all shows is that Labor is determined not to give the coalition any political ammunition for the next election. And what it means for the Morrison Government is that it'll have to win in its own right, not just campaigning against the alternative. Now, to win, they'll need to persuade people they've done a good job, yes, and have a forward, strong agenda, rather than just scaring people out of voting for the other side, because this time it's not going to be as easy. That's why, and I'll say it again, the sooner the government gets back to addressing people's practical concerns and is prepared finally to get into the ring on the big values fight going on in our country, rather than let the left radically redefine this country, I'll tell you, the more likely it will be to get a fourth term.